I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for April the 1st, 2026. Now, April the 1st is commonly associated as being April Fool's Day, but we have no fooling here, okay? Everything we're going to talk about is very serious, especially with the Passover holiday beginning this evening. And just like you, I'm going to be involved in various Passover activities, and we actually have a very serious subject matter to go through as we prepare to conclude the Addressing Avoided Issues in the Torah series, which should take us through the end of this week. Also, of course, and we'll cover this in the news roundup, not only is tonight the start of Passover, but we should also see the launch of Artemis 2 sometime late afternoon, early evening from Cape Canaveral, Florida. And President Trump should be making an address from the Oval Office about the war in Iran. So there are a lot of things right now which are weighing heavily on many people. All right, our theology roundup. If you will, please turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net. Click on the Articles tab and scroll down to Addressing the Frequently Avoided Issues Messianics Encounter in the Torah. Click there, and then a PDF file will open up, and this is where we left off on Friday with issue number 6, Genocide. And really, it involves commanded genocide by God. Now, we're getting ready to start Passover, and while the material we're going through today doesn't mention Passover or the death of the firstborn, this information should nicely complement that subject matter because, of course, many of us, as we have commemorated Passover for many years, or perhaps we're new, we encounter, okay, the plague of the firstborn upon Egypt. The Israelites need to have the blood of the lamb over the doorposts and lintel of their house. But was this not a genocide of sorts, going after the firstborn of Egypt? And so how do we sort through in the Bible this idea of commanded genocide by God? And of course, it begs many, many questions throughout human history and even into the current Middle Eastern situation. But we're going to stay constrained to the Bible. Okay, this is mainly an issue, of course, we find, which affected ancient times, although different ethical and moral principles, different ethical and moral questions remain true of all time. One of the most significant claims against the Tanakh, particularly as argued by both critics of the Bible and liberal theologians, is that the Old Testament portrays a God who was intent on killing everyone who opposed him. To be honest, if this has never been raised at any Messianic Torah study you have been a part of at some point by someone, even if they're just acknowledging this is what critics of the Bible say, your Torah study needs significant improvement. It does not take that much to find how a great deal of criticism against the Bible is focused around the view that the Lord is genocidal, telling the ancient Israelites to move into a location and utterly decimate a population and its property. Much of the Messianic movement has made a mistake in failing to address these issues from a proper conservative perspective, which seeks to understand whether or not God is really, quote unquote, genocidal. Indeed, I have seen it brought up from time to time, infrequently. I would even go as far as saying rather infrequently in a Torah study, Bible study. What do you do when God tells the Israelites to go into a population and decimate it utterly? Is that commanded genocide by God, or not? Um, and almost always, this is kind of the issue where we just kind of shove it off to the side and then we move on, right? Uh, we don't fully know what to do. People who are conservative in their theology tend to know that these are the areas where understanding ancient Israel in the ancient Near East is imperative, particularly as it involves, well, why would God have commanded such things by his people toward another population? And who were those people? What did they do? What was their religion? What was their culture like? The two main things which you see uh, denounced throughout the Torah regarding the nations at large are their idolatry and sexual immorality. How bad were certain things? Those are the different matters you would need to look for. Okay, let's get back to the study. While there are some, significant examples in the Pentateuch, which are often argued as being genocidal, from the flood of Genesis 6 through 8 to the judgment on the firstborn of Egypt, Exodus 11 and 12, right? Associated with Passover, both of which may be classified as acts of God, right? What should concern us the most regarding quote unquote genocide is seen in the book of Deuteronomy as ancient Israel prepared to take the promised land. So, all right, things like the Genesis flood or the death of the firstborn, those would be acts of God, right? Still beg many questions, but God was responsible for that. But the Israelites getting ready to move into Canaan, the promised land, in the book of Deuteronomy, commanded to go in and decimate populations. What do you do about that? When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. Deuteronomy 7, 1 and 2, New American Standard. For a God who had just called his people to love him in the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6, it is no wonder why this kind of instruction is often overlooked in our reading of the Et Hanan, Deuteronomy 3:23 to 7:11. That's the Torah reading. But it is clear that if our engagement with biblical studies is to improve, these kinds of issues cannot be avoided anymore. The verb haram, occurring in the hifil stem, casual action, active voice, means ban, devote, exterminate. Brown Driver Briggs, and appears twice in Deuteronomy 7:2. Hakarem, tacharim otam, or doom them to destruction. New Jewish Publication Society version. Deuteronomy 7:22 to 26. Further details. The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them quickly, for the wild beasts would grow too numerous for you. But the Lord your God will deliver them before you and will throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. He will deliver their kings into your hand so that you will make their name perish from under heaven. No man will be able to stand before you until you have destroyed them. The graven images of their gods you are to burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, nor take it for yourselves, or you will be snared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God. You shall not bring an abomination into your house, and like it come under the ban. You shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly abhor it, for it is something banned. Deuteronomy 7:22 through 26, New American Standard. In this case, readers see some of the reasons why the Lord commanded ancient Israel to go and wipe out the inhabitant nations of Canaan. He did not want the Israelites to adopt their religious worship. Those who would flippantly accuse God of being quote unquote genocidal do not often consider why he commanded the Israelites to go in and wipe out those inhabitant nations. Deuteronomy 9, 5, and 6 provides the reason why. It is not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart that you are going to possess their land, but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out before you in order to confirm the oath which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then, it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stubborn people. Deuteronomy 9, 5, and 6, New American Standard. Here it is plainly stated, Ki brishat hagoyim ha'ele, because of the wickedness of these nations, that God was going to exterminate them from the promised land. Before this word was delivered in Deuteronomy, this great wickedness had already been detailed in Leviticus 18, where the Lord said, "You shall not do what is done in the land of Egypt where you lived, nor are you to do what is done in the land of Canaan where I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes." Leviticus 18:3, New American Standard. This chapter primarily prohibited various sexual activities. Males were not to have intercourse with their mothers, Leviticus 18:7, or sisters, Leviticus 18:9, or aunts, Leviticus 18:12 and 13. And both homosexuality, Leviticus 18:22, and bestiality, Leviticus 18:23, were strictly forbidden. Perhaps of most significance to the Israelites entering into Canaan was Leviticus 18:21. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. New American Standard. The worship of the Canaanite deity Molech was the most serious sin which the ancient Israelites were not to fall prey to, and was something which was quite ancient even before the time of Moses. Molech worship usually involved child sacrifice, and while there was variation in how it was performed, quote, it is usually assumed that children were thrown into a furnace or fire as a part of a ceremony, though whether they were killed or made insensitive is uncertain, unquote. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. It is sometimes thought that the screaming cries of an infant burning alive were meant to be the worship directed toward the deity. The brutal murder of innocent children to this god and the utter corruption it brought to Canaanite society were undeniably some of the reasons why God would have told Israel to move in and wipe them out. The Canaanites being wiped out had nothing to do with the Israelites. It had everything to do with themselves. Unfortunately, the witness of the book of Joshua is that not all of the Canaanites were able to be removed from the promised land. And so the patriarch Joshua admonished Israel before dying, be very firm then to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you will not associate with these nations, these which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. Joshua 23, 6 and 7, New American Standard. The later testimony of 1st and 2nd Kings shows that in failing to purge all of the ungodly influences from the promised land, the sin of Molech worship was a major factor in seeing the United Kingdom of Israel divide, 1 Kings 11, 7 following, and the kings of both the northern and southern kingdoms did in fact offer their own children to the fire. 2 Kings 16:3, 17:17, 31, 21:6, also 2 Chronicles 28:3. It is very difficult for any of us to comprehend a loving God commanding his chosen people to utterly exterminate another people, especially today when we look back at a Jewish history complete with Hitler's Holocaust. But apparently, the sin of the Canaanites had been so abhorrent in the eyes of the Lord that, similar to the judgment issued upon Sodom and Gomorrah, the Israelites were to eliminate this influence from the promised land. And surprisingly enough, as we view these events within a much larger canonical context, eliminating the Canaanites as seen throughout much of Joshua may actually be an example of God's mercy. It can be an example of mercy for the people, as Revelation 20, verse 12 indicates how the unrighteous condemned are to be judged according to their deeds, New American Standard. They do not all receive the same degree of punishment in the lake of fire. So, in the case of the Canaanites, by the Israelites eliminating them with occupying the promised land, they did in fact stop the Canaanites from receiving any further eternal judgment by Almighty God. Our improvement for understanding the issue of divine quote-unquote genocide can only take place by Messianics understanding the religious depravity of the ancient Canaanites and their possible influence on the ancient Israelites. When we can stop avoiding this issue and comprehend the deplorable practice of Molech worship and its child sacrifice, we can then understand how important the Torah's regulations on wiping them out would have been. This was by no means the kind of worship God wanted his chosen people to practice, but the sad testimony of later sections of the Tanakh is that they actually did. And as we close this up, there's a footnote here. 2003, Zondervan released this volume, Show Them No Mercy, 4 views on God and Canaanite genocide. So actually, this subject matter is so difficult for some to sort through, there had to be a multiple views volume released on it. Okay, so tomorrow we will continue in this series. We're going to be picking up with the last of the avoided issues, the development and advances of gender relations. So that will definitely be interesting. But no, the avoiding issues in the Torah, this is something I know many of us have witnessed for many years. And there are a lot of people who just don't know what to do with some of these matters. That's why they are just kind of put aside for another day. Well, I'm here to tell you, and this analysis that we're going through, I originally put it together in 2008. So that should give you an idea about how much Messianic theology and thought has progressed since, or has not progressed since then. And look, we're in the year 2026 now. We gotta do better. We've got to do better. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup. Let's now move over to the news. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive. It changes from day to day. And with Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion in the Middle East right now, the news is literally changing from hour to hour. And it's impossible to stay up to date with everything, but I do like to cover some of the high points, which I passively encounter on social media, mainly, although not exclusively, on Instagram and X. And we do have quite a few things to go through. Most of them involve Operation Epic Fury. So before we get into this, number one, please do be praying for peace. Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, Iran. Pray for a quick, decisive end to Operation Epic Fury, Roaring Lion. Pray for the Messianic Jewish community in Israel. Pray for the underground Christians in Iran. Pray for all of the civilians who are caught up in some of this. Pray for our men and women in uniform, the U.S. Armed Forces, the Israel Defense Forces, our Gulf allies, and even, yes, our NATO allies. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. We really haven't heard a lot about that recently. And number three, for reason and sanity here on the American home front, the Western Hemisphere, and of course, we can always be praying for world peace. And a really big one late this afternoon, and I'll be watching as soon as we conclude and we send out the updates. Artemis 2 is supposed to be launched from Cape Canaveral. So after 54 years or so, we're going to be going back to the moon. So this is something I'm really excited about. All right, so all the news stories, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. You can go watch the clips, read the news articles, whatever the case might be. All right, our first story. This is from Forward on Instagram. This is a somewhat progressive Jewish source, but I thought this was very important from yesterday. The headline, Inside the Christian Theology Driving Modern Anti-Semitism. Supersessionism, that's also known as replacement theology, might sound like an esoteric theological concept, but it has clear repercussions for Jews. And I'm not going to go through all of this because some of this is very familiar to you, but we need to keep tabs. Why are figures like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens increasingly turning on Israel and Jews? Our Mira Fox, who has a master's from Harvard Divinity School, argues it's not just politics, it's theology, specifically a centuries-old Christian idea called supersessionism that's finding new life online. Ancient idea, modern weapon. Supersessionism holds that Christianity replaced Judaism, that Jesus, quote unquote, fulfilled the covenant, rendering Jewish law and chosenness obsolete. Long a source of anti-Jewish thinking, Mira writes, it's now being revived and repackaged for a digital audience. Okay, so many of us have encountered supersessionism in our Messianic experience. I doubtlessly encountered it at Asbury Seminary. My Old Testament professor, Brian Russell, who I legitimately learned a lot from, just randomly at one time got up and said, I don't see any biblical justification for the existence of the state of Israel. All of us are going to have that kind of a moment at one point or another. Now, just because you are supersessionist doesn't automatically mean that you do not think that the state of Israel has a right to exist, that Jews shouldn't have their own country, that they shouldn't have self-determination. You can technically believe in replacement theology and still think that the state of Israel has a place in the global community, but not on the basis of biblical prophecy or biblical promises. No, Jewish self-determination, meaning that they have a right to a state, but so do the Palestinians right alongside them. But what this post does is it raises the awareness that supersessionism is getting new play now because of social media. And of course, big influencers like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes. And what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about, the Dale Partridges of the world, the Father Calvin Robinsons, the Joel Webbins? There's no, silver bullet answer today, but we do call these things out when we see them. And in the case of our ministry, we've got open files. And we'll, as part of our ongoing conversation, we'll keep you up to speed as best as we can. Okay. From Visegrad 24 yesterday, Israel ends all defense deals with France. Israel ends all defense deals with France. The Israeli Ministry of Defense has suspended all defense procurement from France and terminated existing contracts. This decision follows Paris's refusal to allow U.S. aircraft carrying military supplies for Israel to transit French airspace. And of course, this is not the only complication which has resulted from Operation, in Israel's case, Roaring Lion. But we also know that Israel shares a lot of intelligence with the different, Western European countries, and it has helped prevent, disasters from occurring. Terminating contracts is one thing. What would happen if Israel stopped sharing intelligence with various Western European countries? So this is a situation which, of course, can reverse very quickly. It shows you the tentative nature of this conflict, but it also, if not resolved, shows you that old alliances, old partnerships are beginning to possibly fracture. From 2C TV, yesterday, the 31st of March, Isfahan was rocked by powerful explosions tonight. This is from 3:07 p.m. yesterday. The Islamic Republic's largest missile production facilities and weapons depots were the primary targets in a joint U.S.-Israeli operation. Bunker busters were used to strike deep underground sites at the core of the regime's military infrastructure. And there's a 1-minute, 42-second clip, which goes into a lot more detail. We do like to pass on that kind of information because the main goals of this military campaign are to stop Iran's nuclear aspirations and stop their ballistic missile program. And indeed, how much further can the Islamic Republic take? They are being literally bombed back into the Stone Age in terms of their military capabilities. And how much of what is taking place right now is intended to soften them up. Okay, next story. This is from Channel 14 News Israel. And there's a 1-minute, 36-second clip. This is from 1:25 p.m. yesterday. So it was when we were live yesterday. This is useful to watch. The end of the Islamic Republic? ? A new major rift is tearing through Tehran as senior clerics break with the Revolutionary Guards, according to senior Iran analyst Dror Balazada. Clerics report that the original regime structure has collapsed and they have been pushed aside by the IRGC. The IRGC now exert total control over the centers of power, the nation's economic flow, and the relationship with Mujtaba Khamenei. The isolation is so extreme that top clerics are now questioning if Mujtaba Khamenei is even alive and what condition he is in. The conclusion from inside Tehran is clear. This is no longer an Islamic Republic. It is now a Revolutionary Guards Republic. Okay, we have heard that throughout this campaign, particularly from Channel 14 Israel, that who's in charge of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, this is information which, of course, can change very quickly, but we pass it on so we can get an idea about, how close is the Islamic Republic to radically changing, to radically shifting. Because if it is not an Islamic Republic, if it's a Revolutionary Guards Republic, essentially, what does that signal to the world? What does that signal to the people of Iran? We wait and see. Okay, so this evening, of course, begins Passover. So Passover has already begun in some parts of the world. Here is an English post, 2-minute, 51 seconds, yesterday, March the 31st, from the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog. From Jerusalem, my Passover message to our Jewish brothers and sisters and brothers around the world. So, and that is in English. And yes, this Passover, we have a lot on our hearts and minds, just because of the past year. Because of last year, it was Operation Rising Lion. Now it's Operation Roaring Lion, Operation Epic Fury, growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Zionism. I hope someone at some point or another in the Messianic community, in their commemoration of Passover, will pause and ask, where are we going to be in the next year? And what about the future of our faith community? Because sooner or later, more and more people are going to move toward that spiritual warfare footing. Not this, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage is going to always be the way it's been. More and more people are going to recognize we're living in different times. And yes, we got to learn from the lessons of 3 decades ago, the turn of the millennium, when there were a lot of people who made a lot of pretty dumb mistakes. I'm holding my tongue, by the way, regarding, making predictions, making strong assertions. That's why we don't listen to them anymore. But we do have to pay attention to what's going on. And that's why we have this news roundup. And while we don't want to be presumptuous, we also do not want to be underinformed or non-informed. We want to stay informed. Okay, open source intel passing on a 20-second clip from Fox News, 3:31 p.m. yesterday. President Trump, the Strait of Hormuz will automatically open after U.S. forces leave Iran, urging other countries to ensure access. My attitude is this: we've done our part. Let the countries using the strait go and open it. And of course, that is mainly a reference to different members of NATO who thus far have not pulled their weight the way the president and the administration have wanted them to pull their weight regarding Operation Epic Fury. And this is just me talking, was one of the, secondary or tertiary goals of Epic Fury for the United States. The United States wanting to see Iran's nuclear aspirations gone, ballistic missile aspirations gone, see a country like China cut off from discount oil and gas. Okay. But one of the tertiary or secondary tertiary goals, what about our fellow NATO allies and partners? How are they going to help us or not? And of course, we're going to mention a few stories regarding discussions which are likely to take place after this conflict regarding the United States and NATO. Okay, from 2CTV yesterday, 3:20 p.m., 2-minute, 29-second clip. Israel's prime minister confirms growing alignment with Arab states ready to stand against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are at the center of these talks. A potential military alignment would mark a historic moment. Arab nations and Israel united against the IRGC threat, and Tusi's observation: if this materializes, it doesn't just change the war, it reshapes the Middle East. Yes, and he's absolutely correct about that. And from the very start, my orientation to approaching the conflict with Iran has been to look at this as a birth pain, right? A labor pain. The Olivet Discourse, you're going to go through these labor pains. And just as a woman goes through labor pains before giving birth to a child, you have a labor pain, and then there's a period of relax, and then, and then another period of relax. And then it just gets an increasing frequency until the delivery, right? So this conflict is a labor pain of sorts. And then that relaxed period, could we see a different kind of Middle East? And of course, are we going to be set up for that Daniel 9:27 covenant with many? Is that going to come into play? Look, we know people are going to talk about it, so we might as well go ahead and mention it. All right, this is from the 29th of March, but came across my X feed yesterday from Steve Bannon, Bannon's War Room, and there's a 7-minute, 17-second clip that's Steve Bannon with Jack Posobiec, and they are both Roman Catholic. And this is in response to Cardinal Pizzabella not having full access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Palm Sunday. Okay, we talked about that earlier in the week. Bannon: we need to get out of this situation where Christians are supplicants to the Israeli government over the most sacred sites in Christendom. This is absurd. Does Netanyahu decide if the Catholic Church can have Mass at the Holy Sepulchre on Palm Sunday? I don't think so. Christians need to take control of the Christian sites. So, one of the things that, and I know people who have followed Steve Bannon over the years, one of the things which has been witnessed with Steve Bannon over the past year or so is he has gone from being relatively pro-Israel, pro-Zionist to becoming a strong critic of Israel and Zionism, and how much of that is rooted in his own Catholicism. And, Catholicism ultimately at its heart is supersessionist. We've also seen that come from, in a much more concentrated, in a much more vitriolic form, people like Candace Owens. Carrie Prejean Baller, even Megyn Kelly. So we just wait and see. Okay. All right. Our next story, Eric Dougherty reposting a clip from Fox News yesterday, 2:03 p.m. So we would have been in the process of concluding yesterday, 21 seconds. It's official. The White House is projecting that as soon as Operation Epic Fury is over, gas prices will plummet to multi-year lows. And Eric Dougherty's conclusion is President Trump has a plan, and then with a U.S. flag emoji. Okay, well, we will certainly see. I know that for a lot of people who have been following this conflict, their issue, yes, eliminate Iran's nuclear aspirations, ballistic missiles, wear the regime down enough that the people of Iran, who around 80% of them, they don't approve of their government, they can take the right action against it. But a lot of people are more concerned about price at the pump, the oil and gas supply. And mind you, the United States, it has sufficient domestic oil and gas. Okay. The United States will be fine, regardless of what happens in terms of getting oil and gas to the people who need it. But it's countries like Japan, South Korea, India, some of these economic powerhouses, which need Middle Eastern oil and gas. Western Europe, they need Middle Eastern oil and gas. So we don't tend to talk about economic matters that much, but we do mention, things like this, because this conflict will have economic repercussions. Okay, open source intel. This is very good. There's a 17-second clip from Prime Minister Netanyahu. I do believe this is Hebrew with English subtitles, from 1:30 p.m. yesterday. Netanyahu, we are building new alliances in the region against the shared Iranian threat. Soon, I hope to share more details with the citizens of Israel. Okay, building new alliances in the region. Okay, thus far as of today, so haven't heard that much about it. Of course, we're getting ready to go into Passover. They are already in Passover, but we do like to pass that kind of information on, and we will wait and see for certain. From the Epic Times yesterday, and here you have a clip from March the 30th. Secretary of State Marco Rubio criticizes NATO allies for denying United States access to bases, raising concerns about the alliance's benefits. And this is not the only thing we're going to be noting from the Secretary of State. But of course, NATO, are particularly the Western European partners, not really helping. They don't have to be directly or even indirectly involved in this Operation Epic Fury, but not really having access to bases so we could refuel aircraft, that sort of thing. What kind of a rift is now building between the United States, which does pay for around 50% or so of NATO's budget, and other NATO members? What's going to come of NATO? Okay, Eric Dougherty, 24-second clip, 5:01 p.m. yesterday. It's official. President Trump confirms the U.S. has set Iran back nearly 2 decades of rebuilding. Devastation. Okay, and we also know that later today, there's supposed to be a major speech made by the president from the Oval Office. Some of you will be in the middle of remembering Passover. Some of you might be watching it on your phones during the Seder, or some of you all, because of circumstance, may not be able to attend a Passover this evening, and you'll be watching it, but you'll catch it later. All right, so here's a clip which has been circulating all over social media. Many conservatives have been responding to it negatively, and justifiably so. It's from Nick Fuentes, and 2 minutes, 43 seconds. And here, Nick Fuentes basically says, pray for Iran. Iran is fighting for the whole world, because he believes that without Iran, Israel is going to certainly extend its influence over the Middle East, Asia, Europe, North America, that Israel is a huge danger to the world. And there are a lot of people out there who are not very happy with Nick Fuentes. What is Nick Fuentes' modus operandi? Many have observed, he'll just say anything in order to get attention. And how much of the Nick Fuentes phenomenon is Nick Fuentes needing attention? And he'll say anything, and the more off the wall, the more crazy, the more idiotic it is, the more attention you will get. Well, I recognize a fanatic. I recognize a moron when I see one. All right. Late this afternoon, certainly before we went live, everything appeared to be a go, including the astronauts being dressed in their spacesuits. And those of you who know the space program, they have to be loaded in to the spacecraft several hours in advance of a launch because of the different checklists, the different tests which have to take place, etc. So we're supposed to see the launch sometime late this afternoon from Cape Canaveral. And I've got a lot of memories coming up in my mind because I have toured the place. I talked about that yesterday, I think. Went in 2005, went to everything that you could go to as a civilian. So I'm excited about it. And by the way, I just want to mention this. I remember going to this particular tower. They called it the restricted area because that's where they, conduct a lot of the launches and everything. But there's some areas, you can go on. And there's this tower you could watch. You could look at, a couple miles away, all the different towers where all the different launch sites. They had Star Trek music playing in the background, which I was very gratified, of course, to hear. It was from the motion picture. Remember the motion picture, the famous scene where the Enterprise leaves space dock, and then they had the music playing for from Wrath of Khan when the Enterprise has to leave the Mutara Nebula before the Reliant explodes. So I remember that. Okay. Human interest. But regarding the space program, Benny Johnson interviewed the NASA administrator. This was posted 6:57 p.m. yesterday, 1:59-second clip. NASA administrator declares alien life exists. And I was sure to watch this in its entirety, go through the clip, some parts of it a few times, just so I would get this accurate. Jarek Isaacman tells me he's 90% sure America will find extraterrestrial life on Mars. Now, you go down here. He talks about if we can get to Mars and we can bring samples back, I put it at a better 90% chance that we could prove there was some microbial life on Mars. Now, Jarek Isaacman, of course, posits the classic scenario that many people have. They look up at the stars and they see, billions, he says 2 trillion, but billions of galaxies. And they wonder, all these points of light, how many of them possibly have planets like Earth? How many of them are in what's called the Goldilocks zone? So ideal for some kind of life. And, a lot of people just on those kinds of numbers think there's no way that humankind is the only sentient life in the universe. Okay, that's a classic scenario. And what that means theologically for us as followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we bring that up periodically. But more likely, and this is the scenario which we had to deal with at seminary 20 years ago. What are we going to do when humans start going back to the moon, going back to Mars? We get a moon base, we look at Mars, and then we have probes going out to Europa, Titan. I mean, these are actually mentioned by Jarek Isaacman. These moons of Jupiter, moons of Saturn, which have ice on them, possibly, microbes under the ice, whatever it might be. What is that going to do to get people to think about the uniqueness of human life? Now, microbes, bacteria on Mars or some of these moons of Jupiter, Saturn, that's probably not going to change someone's understanding. The evolutionists might think, well, these things evolved independently, so life could evolve independently on Earth. That's kind of a different discussion than someone, for example, going to Mars and seeing alien ruins. That would be like, whoa, but microbes, bacteria, that's going to be of a somewhat different variety. It's going to provide a lot of material for debate, speculation, extrapolation, but it would not be the same as discovering quote unquote alien ruins. But hey, I love the space program. I love that it gets people to think deeply, get people to think about not only the majesty of the cosmos, but to, really, plug into God, because when difficult questions are answered or asked, you have to say, hey, Lord, what does this mean for me and your creation? I mean, all of us in life have to ask, why am I here? Well, when you posit, why am I here in the universe? And you start hearing new things about the universe, new discoveries being made, then these matters take on some new dynamics. Okay. Next story. This is from Breitbart yesterday, the 31st of March. The headline: Trump says U.S. will exit Iran in 2 to 3 weeks. Okay. So it is believed that what the administration's plan is regarding Operation Epic Fury, probably going to come out of the broadcast from the White House this evening. Okay, moving on to more of what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. Here's a clip Eric Dougherty forwarded on from Marco Rubio on Sean Hannity last night. 23 seconds. This is from 8:29 p.m. It's official. Marco Rubio and President Trump are looking for Cuba to fall soon. The people in charge of the apparatus of government there are both incompetent and unable to solve these problems. So we definitely know that Cuba is an ongoing issue. And we have heard reports that once the Iranian situation is resolved to the administration's liking, Cuba will be one of the next focuses. Okay, here is another clip from that same interview. This is from Sean Hannity, 8:51 p.m., and there's 1 minute, 9 second clip. So you can watch this and look at more of the details later. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio questions NATO's value, warning the alliance becomes a one-way street if the U.S. can't use European bases to defend its own interests. And, Marco Rubio goes into detail regarding how, hey, I've been a strong supporter of NATO, but if the U.S. basically involved in this conflict in Iran can't use NATO bases, when this conflict is over, and I even mentioned this before, they were saying it specifically. He says, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make. Now, we don't want to be presumptuous about what the U.S. is going to do or not do regarding NATO, but in the event that the United States, and by the way, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was founded with the Treaty of Washington. So the United States has always been at the very heart and center of NATO. And for the country which, helped found NATO, the main country to pull out, possibly, what does that say about NATO? It says more than it would say. Of course, we're speaking hypothetically, that it doesn't serve its original intent, which was to, of course, oppose the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had formed the Warsaw Pact. But where would that leave principally the Western European countries? And this is, and if the U.S. were to pull from NATO and NATO were to collapse or would have to reinvent itself, that is where some people in prophecy could start speculating. The new European world government, revived Roman Empire. This is what'll come out of that. We don't know, but we have to note the things people are going to be speculating about, the extrapolations they're going to make. And look, we're going to be affected by it regardless of whether the U.S. stays. We see a new NATO, the U.S. leaves. You see NATO have to reinvent itself, or NATO just dissolve and something new in its place. those are all the kinds of possibilities we have to be aware of. Okay, next story, and this is from Tusi TV, 9:25 p.m. yesterday. There's a 2-minute, 9-second clip. The Islamic Republic's so-called leadership is nowhere to be found. Ghalibaf hasn't been seen in over a week, yet, quote unquote, his X account is still pushing narratives that sound more like U.S. political talking points than anything coming out of Tehran. And Tusi's conclusion, this isn't leadership, it's outsourcing propaganda. Okay. We know Tusi gets a lot of information straight from inside the Islamic Republic, and we are monitoring what is in all probability the final weeks, months of the Islamic Republic. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender. This morning, 4:21 a.m., U.S. President Donald J. Trump told The Telegraph that he is strongly considering pulling the United States out of NATO after it failed to join his ongoing war against Iran, stating that the alliance is a paper tiger and that this is known by Russia and President Vladimir Putin. Now, we know that the way the president works, the president who comes from not a legal background, he comes from a business background. He's going to talk down to those who he wants to see change, right? Like, like my old man, I'm not speaking about my father, but like my old man who always told me I needed to get off my ass and do something with my life. In his own way, that's the kind of way the president acts toward NATO. NATO needs to do something. Otherwise, we're going to pull out because it's no benefit for us. And even Vladimir Putin knows that it's a paper tiger. So the president will use some, negative reinforcement to get somebody to do something. And of course, that's pretty commonplace in a lot of business dealings. So not surprised to see that's how the president acts. Now, having noted that, okay, next story, and then the story after that. Okay, this is from Rapid Response 47, sending out a post from Donald Trump's Truth Social platform, where he said, this is 7:46 a.m. today, Iran's new regime president, much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors, has just asked the United States of America for a ceasefire. That would be the current president, Peshkian, I believe. We will consider when Hormuz Strait is open, free, and clear. Until then, we are blasting Iran into oblivion, or as they say, back to the Stone Ages. So a lot of people have responded to that regarding, the president of Iran right now is trying to be reasonable and cooperative. Are you serious about this? Okay. All right. So here is the story. I accidentally passed this over. This is something to keep in mind as it regards President Trump. From Open Source Intel, posted 4:52 a.m. today. U.S. official on Trump to Axios. This isn't 3D chess. It's 12-dimensional. He contradicts himself regularly, so nobody knows what he's thinking. It's on purpose. Okay, that may not be how any of us chooses to operate. It may not be how any of us chooses to conduct ourselves, particularly as believers. Let your yes be yes and let your no be no, right? You need to be straightforward. You need to be transparent. Sometimes you can address something indirectly from the sides, but none of this, you put one thing out one day and another thing out another day, and they're contradictory. Many of us would assume that is how the world works. And yes, that is the kind of deliberate deception which can indeed take place in business negotiations as well as in warfare. You don't tell, your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing, kind of thing. That can be done on purpose because the final goal, the final objective is just it seems so impossible that you have to get your enemy to always guess, what's going to happen this time, what's going to happen next time. And your enemy just gets so confused or so frustrated that they finally capitulate. Okay, I think that is the kind of strategy, that's the kind of tactic a Donald Trump employs for what we see going on in the Middle East. Many people, of course, would not do things like that. I wouldn't do things like that. The way I would operate, in terms of theology, in terms of knowing that there are these issues coming down the pike where a messianic movement is not too prepared, my view would be, let's start planting seeds now. Let's start getting some ideas into their heads, where people start to process these things. They may recognize them as uncomfortable, but it's better to talk about it now than wait until some big drama takes place, right? If you have small children, sorry to say this, you got to start telling them now, even if they're 6, 7, 8, about the birds and the bees. You got to start like, okay, where do babies come from, rather than waiting for that big drama when they are 11, 12, 13, and they encounter the wrong conversation, at the elementary school cafeteria or the junior high school cafeteria. You've got to start preparing them now. I mean, that's more or less how I work with, controversial areas of theology. Let's start planting seed, but that's not how President Trump works. He's going to say one thing one day, another thing another day, and they're completely different because he wants to keep the adversaries of America off balance and off guard and always frustrated. What are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? And that's something which I don't think we process enough. But yet, if you go back to the first Trump administration and then the second Trump administration, that is how he has operated. He's not operating in a conventional manner. It's completely different than the way most of us would operate. Were we in charge or were we in leadership? Okay, we've got 2 more stories. And okay, this is in response to what I just referenced from Rapid Response 47 in terms of, let me pull that up again for you. Yeah, regarding Iran's new regime president. Okay, so this is from Goldie Gamari. This is how she responded to this. President Trump says he will, quote unquote, consider a ceasefire only after the Hormuz Strait is open, free, and clear. Her comment, since the quote unquote politicians inside the regime have lost control of the IRGC, I don't see a ceasefire happening anytime soon. I could be wrong, though. So at least I think she and others are aware that, there's some kind of a long-term purpose for the president communicating the way he's communicating. Okay, here's another response to this by Nio Berg, 8:28 a.m. today, where she says, this could very easily be a way to further create division and infighting within the regime in Iran. And her observation, I don't believe anyone has asked for a ceasefire. Indeed, how many statements made by the president are to deliberately get the enemy to be frustrated, not know what's going to happen next, get them confused, get them fighting internally among themselves, and then the action which is taken, they were completely unprepared for. When you analyze a figure like Donald Trump, that is the way you have to approach him. You cannot approach him conventionally. And unfortunately, in the world of prophecy and Christian people who follow prophecy, they have very little training or acumen when it comes to the complexities of history and the complexities of politics, much less any kind of counteractivity against an opponent. Okay, and our final story for today, and I thought we should close up with this. This is posted 9:29 a.m. Historic day. NASA aims to launch 4 astronauts today on humanity's first crewed mission back to the moon, and more than half a century later. The launch is set for 6:24 p.m., so that would be 5:24 p.m. here in Central Time, with a 2-hour window after. Pretty good viewing across most of the state. Here's the map below. How long after the launch your area will be able to see it visible in the sky. I used to live in Orlando, so I used to frequently see launches But if you live in the state of Florida, you live in South Georgia, yeah, be sure to get outside and see if you can take a look at Artemis. I'm going to be limited to watching it on TV, but I'm excited about it, and um, certainly excited about the different questions which will be raised regarding the universe. I'm sure a number of the creationist ministries are going to be having a few pieces on it. We'll see what happens. But it's high time that the U.S. gets back to the moon and that we get out there into the greater universe. Okay. And that finishes up our news roundup. Tomorrow, of course, we will be continuing in the addressing avoided issues in the Torah series. We will be talking about gender relations tomorrow, and then Friday we'll be closing up this series. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. If you have not already, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can take a look at some back issues of our newsletter, Outreach's Real News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, etc. Be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart on social media. It will definitely help its exposure. And be sure to repost this episode to your social media feeds: Facebook, X, Instagram. Email it to a friend. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Chag Sameach and Shalom, and take care.